Hello, everyone, and welcome to an EAS Consulting Group webinar. My name is Jessica Lloyd, the Marketing Communications Coordinator with EAS, and I'll be your host for today's presentation. First, please join me in welcoming today's presenters, Tim Lombardo and Omar Oyarzabal. EAS Consulting Group Senior Director Tim Lombardo is a widely regarded expert in food safety and microbiology with over 25 years of direct experience leading food safety programs at a variety of manufacturing facilities. He is a lead instructor through FSPCA in preventive controls for both human and animal foods, is certified in thermal aseptic processing and sterilization through the Better Process Control School, and is a lead instructor for the Fsap Controls Alliance. EAS Senior Consultant for Food Services, Omar Oyarzabal, PhD, works with clients to develop food safety protocols per Fsbp and Fsap regulations and facilitates customized client training programs. Dr. Oyarzabal holds many food safety certificates through AFDO, including Processing Authority, Seafood Fsap Lead Instructor, Sanitation Control Procedures for Fish and Fish Products, Foreign Supplier Verification Program Lead Instructor, and a Sprout Safety Alliance Lead Instructor. Today's webinar is a review of the Foreign Supplier Verification Program's guidance for industry. The Food and Drug Administration has released the latest version of Foreign Supplier Verification Programs for importers of food and humans and animals guidance for industry. This one-hour webinar will review the document's latest guidelines and provide a Q&A session to help implement the information from these guidelines. Our team will address questions as time allows after the presentation. Please submit any questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available following the presentation. Thank you again for joining us today, and with that, I'll hand it over to Tim and Omar.
Thank you, Jessica. Again, my name is Tim Lombardo, and I'm the Senior Director for EAS Consulting Group. Let's see if I can get my tech here to work. This is me, and this is Omar. So today we're going to talk through what the purpose of the Foreign Supplier Verification Program is, give a brief review of FSVP inspections that are conducted by the FDA. Omar is going to talk about the foods that are covered and exempted by the rule, and then we'll finish off with what are some of the FSVP requirements for standard requirements as well as modified requirements. Simply, the Foreign Supplier Verification Program is a means for US-based importers to perform certain risk-based activities to verify that the food that they are importing into the United States has been produced in a fashion that is meets all applicable US safety regulations. The specific regulation is 21 CFR 1.500. And it has a set of standard requirements for larger importers, as well as some modified procedures for smaller importers, smaller foreign suppliers, as well as some modifications for dietary supplement ingredients, as well as specific countries that are considered equivalent from a food safety program system. So we'll talk through what those modified procedures are towards the end of the presentation. FDA is actively conducting inspections on foreign supplier verification programs. Unlike the traditional facility inspections where an FDA inspector or inspectors will come to a site and review the food production, good manufacturing practices, pest control, possibly sanitation, allergen controls. In an FSVP inspection, the FDA is looking more on the records. It's a review of the record as opposed to direct observations of manufacturing. While most of these inspections could be conducted at the importer's place of business, there are options for the inspector to be able to provide the review electronically. And so they may have an electronic exchange of records, and then conduct a live virtual inspection of the formal inspection for the FDA. If any deficiencies are found, then of course the importer is allowed an opportunity to correct them. And the way that that is documented is with a 483. So when an FDA inspector is notifying an importer, a company, you'll receive either in the mail or more commonly email, what's called a 482. And that's the form that looks like this. Basically, it's just a request for inspection and a request for records. And you can see that there's a couple of options there, that the records are either to be made available during the inspection or sent electronically to the FDA. Accompanying that 482 document is would be a letter similar to the one on the left, basically explaining what the inspection is, the regulations that allow for the inspections, and then some information on how to communicate and respond to the FDA. It's important to know that in this document, the records that are being requested must be provided in English. So that's a very important thing to understand, that every record that the FDA will be provided must have an English translation. The document on the right of this screen is an example of what an FDA inspector may ask for as far as documentation for specific suppliers or specific food that are being imported. So they'll list the different focus products and suppliers, and they'll provide a date range. So most of these inspections are asking for about 1 year's worth of records. And this letter will also provide information on how to submit the records electronically to the FDA inspector. Going back to 2018, here's a simple chart of the number of food 483s that were issued by FDA and versus the number of Foreign Supplier Verification Program observations. So you can see in 2018, 2019, the number of 483s that were submitted on food manufacturers was about 2,500, 2,600 in that range. And the number of FSVP observations in those 483s were between 400 and 500. And then the pandemic hit. We had shut down in early 2020. FDA stopped going to factories. They stopped doing a lot of work in 2020 and 2021 that was direct interfacing with manufacturing. And so the number, you can see the number of 483s for 2020 and 2021 dropped significantly. However, in this time frame, they realized that what could be inspected was FSVP compliance. And so they created the system for being able to provide documentation to the FDA on your compliance for FSVP records. And so while the number of 483s in 2020 and 2021 dropped, the number of FSVP observations in the same time frame increased dramatically. And then we move on to 2022, FDA started to get back inspecting facilities. The number of food 483s increased again, near the same levels as 2018, 2020. I'm sorry, 2019. But then you'll also see that the number of FSVP observations in those 483s increased even more. So what this says is that once FDA started to inspect for compliance to the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, they realized that there was a large number of non-compliance or not understanding that the requirement applied to the specific importer. And so the number of 483 observations related to Fsvp increased dramatically over the next couple years. And the focus into 2023 is going to be similar to that of 2022. There'll be increasing numbers of Foreign Supplier Verification Program inspections conducted by FDA. And hopefully, the number of Fsvp observations starts to come down as more and more importers and manufacturers become aware of the regulation and how it applies to their operations. And we'll let Omar take it from here.
Thank you, Tim. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I see that there are some one question already in the Q&A box. We will answer all those questions at the very end when we finish up the presentation. So if you have some questions that you would like to start writing there, please go ahead and we will entertain them at the end. So a better way to see what is covered is sometimes to think the other way is what is not covered. Remember that we have several regulations that were in place already by FDA before FSMA and the Foreign Supplier Verification Program started. So next slide, please. The first one that we would like to always remind people, if it is a regulation, if it is a food product coming that is under the regulation of the USDA, they're not going to be covered directly by this, regulation. Next slide, please. There are also the regulations that come from the hazard analysis and critical control point that were established by FDA for fish and fisheries product back in the mid-1990s, the second half of the 90s, and towards the end of the 90s, early 2000, they started with the juice and juice product. So this regulation, because we were already importing a lot of seafood and we were importing a lot of, juices in the form of mainly, concentrate purees. We already developed that. The agency, when they thought about this regulation, they already added some components that are part of those regulations to kind of verify what the foreign supplier were doing. Next slide, please. Any food that is imported for research of evaluation, and there is, agency suggests using some labels like food for research of evaluation use, those are going to be also exempt. Next slide, please. Food that are brought for personal consumption that are not going to go to market or to the retail stores, that's going to be an exempted too. When it comes to alcoholic beverages, there are some specific exemptions that are unique, and I cannot go into the details here, but are based on what they are within the Federal Alcohol Administration Act and what would be part of a product that is already just ready to go into consumption, or would be part of an alcoholic beverage that, again, is not directly regulated by FDA. Next slide, please. The same is in here. If they are already meeting part of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, they don't require that. Next slide, please. If the product is a non-alcoholic beverage and is pre-packed, that prevents any direct human contact from food, that could be also an exempt. when it's only just a small amount in the sales of the facility, that can also be considered an exemption. Next slide, please. There are cases also when a food is just passing by the US. The US is not the final country of destination of that food. That would be also an exempt because the product is not going to be distributed here in the USA. Next slide, please. So when there's a food that was manufactured here and is kind of returned, that would be also an exemption. This is in the case of, we raise the food, we harvest, and we send it to other countries for any further processing or anything, and it doesn't end up being processed and is returned. So basically, if we summarize a little bit, the exemptions are related within the agency to all the products that are under HACCP, the fish and fisheries product, juice and juice product, any kind of food that is for research of evaluation, certain alcoholic beverages and ingredients. Again, that's a little bit of a part that has a lot of details that we are not covering here. Of course, anything that is covered by USDA, food imported for personal consumption, transshipped, food that is imported for processing and then exported, that is not going to be sold to the in the US, that would be exempt also, and products that are returned. One thing that I would like to cover here is that there are also a set of regulations, mainly the ones covering low acid canned foods under 21 CFR Part 113. If we know for a long time that this regulation has been in place for several decades, so if a facility is exporting to the US canned product, the Foreign Supplier Verification Program importer doesn't need to verify the control of the biological hazard in those products, because that regulation requires the filing of the product, the obtaining of an SID number, and all that the Fsvp importer needs to do is just to ensure that the filing is properly done. There are some other components about what Tim mentioned before about dietary supplement that we are not going to cover in here. So I think this is enough for my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. So now we're going to transition into what are the requirements for FSVP. Keep in mind that the FSVP course, there is a course that is available to be taken. It's a 2-day course. So obviously, we're not going to be covering everything in that 2-day course in a 45-minute presentation. But as a means of an overview, the standard FSVP requirements include that the FSVP importer must be located in the United States. So if you are a foreign manufacturer outside of the United States, and you do not have an entity in the United States, you cannot be the FSVP importer. The FSVP importer must be located in the United States. The FSVP importer can identify qualified individuals to perform the FSVP activities on their behalf. So you can contract someone to act as your qualified individual as an FSVP importer. However, FDA states that you must, as an importer, you must conduct a review and an assessment of the qualified individual's activities. So what this says is that as the FSVP importer, while you can contract the verification activities to a consultant or some other entity, you are still essentially responsible for the contents of that assessment. So as an FSVP importer, you either do it yourself or you contract it. Either way, you are still responsible for the accuracy of that activity. The FSVP importer is also responsible for developing, maintaining, and following the Fsvp regulation. Where I want to describe now is the difference between an FSVP importer and the importer of record. And they may be the same entity or they may be a different entity. So as a way of example, if I am a foreign manufacturer and I want to export my food from Europe into the United States, and I contract a broker is doing the importing activities, and it is going straight to another food manufacturer in the United States. So the importer, the broker, the distributor may be the importer of record, and the receiving facility that is going to further process my food ingredients could be the FSVP importer. So the importer of record can or may not be the same entity as the FSVP importer. When there is no U.S. owner or consignee of the food at the point of entry, then a U.S. agent or representative can be designated to serve as the FSVP importer. Again, that U.S. agent must have a U.S. entity in order to do the FSVP activities. A foreign supplier of a food that's being exported to the United States is an establishment that manufactures or processes the foods, raises the animal, and grows the food, and without further manufacturing or processing, with the exception of things such as labeling or other similar activities of a de minimis nature. So what that means is that if I am importing different foods from foreign suppliers, I'm working through a broker, for example, or a central distribution center, I should say, then the foreign supplier verification activities need to be conducted on the manufacturers, not the distributors. And so if I'm working through a distributor, a food distributor located in Spain, and that distributor is bringing food from 4 manufacturers to a central distribution location, and I'm contracting those 4 foods to come into the United States through the distribution facility, the Foreign Supplier Verification Program needs to be conducted on the 4 food manufacturers, not the distribution facility. The distribution facility is not doing any manufacturing or processing of the food. And so they're simply storing it and distributing it without any further processing. So if I have one distributor and that one distributor has 4 food manufacturers, the FSVP will apply to the 4 food manufacturing facilities. For each food that you import that is subject to the FSVP regulation, so Omar went through a list of foods that are not subject to the regulation. So for those that are, you must maintain, develop, and follow an FSVP that provides adequate assurances that the foreign supplier is producing the food in compliance with at least the same level of public health protection as those required under the appropriate regulation. So if you're making a human food, or if you're importing a human food, then 21 CFR Part 117 applies. If it's an animal food, Part 507, and if it's produce, Part 112. So whatever you are importing needs to have been produced in a fashion that is at least at the same level of public health protection as these three regulations as they apply. The FSVP must be specific to each foreign supplier of a food. So if I am importing chocolate and the chocolate is being produced by 4 different foreign suppliers, even though it's the exact same food, I need to have a foreign supplier verification program for each of those foreign suppliers. So I would need to have 4 separate FSVPs, 1 for each supplier. If I have one supplier providing 5 or 6 or more multiple ingredients or foods, then I must have a separate foreign supplier verification program for each of those foods as well. I must have take into account not only that the supplier is producing the food in a safe fashion, but also that I understand the risks and hazards associated with each of the foods that are being imported. The regulation also has provisions for a modified foreign supplier verification program. And so there are some requirements. So for very small importers, the first threshold and primary threshold is that the importer, which includes any subsidiaries and affiliates, average less than $1 million in sales of human food. And this is for human food, very small importers. For animal food, very small importers, the financial limit is $2,500,000. And we look at the last 3 years average. So in this case, we're in 2023. So we would look at the sales in food for 2022, 2021, and 2020, take an average of those 3 years. And if I was less than $1 million for human food, or less than $2,500,000 for animal food, then I would be considered a very small importer. For foreign suppliers to be considered a small foreign supplier, that threshold, again, for the same 3 years would be $500,000. And for a very small foreign supplier, it would be $1 million for the last 3 years average. For animal foods, for a small foreign supplier, would be the threshold is $500,000. And for a very small business, very small foreign supplier, the threshold is $2,500,000. So some requirements for modified foreign supplier verification program. For very small FSVP importers, you first must be able to document that you meet the definition of a very small importer. So that's the first requirement. This documentation must be established before you import food, and then every year after, before December 31st of each calendar year. So prior to your first import, and then every year after, before the end of December. And then you must obtain assurances, written assurances, every 2 years from your foreign suppliers that the food they are producing is consistent with US safety standards. Small foreign manufacturers must provide documentation that they meet the definition of a small foreign manufacturer as specified by the FDA in this regulation. And they must provide documentation of their eligibility for a small foreign supplier before the initial import of food, and then again every year annually before December 31st. Written assurances. So a foreign supplier must provide a written assurance to the Fsvp importer that offers at least a brief description of the preventive controls that the supplier is implementing, or a statement that the supplier is in compliance with their state, local, county, tribal, or other non-federal food safety laws. So this reassurance or written assurance must be provided to the Fsvp importer for all small foreign suppliers and small FSVPs. There are other modified Fsvp requirements for dietary supplements and their components. Dietary supplements and their components fall under a different regulation, 21 CFR 111. And the Fsvp requirements are that there are established compliance specifications, that the specifications are being met in compliance with 21 CFR, in accordance with 21 CFR 111. The Fsvp must obtain annual written assurances of compliance and follow the standard record keeping requirements. If you import a dietary supplement except as specified above in these first section, you are then subject to Fsvp requirements similar to those of the standard requirements, except you are not required to conduct a hazard analysis, and the supplier verification activity must be designed to provide adequate assurances that your supplier uses processes and procedures that provide the same level of public health protection as that required by 21 CFR 111. There are further modifications in the Fsvp regulation that allows certain foods from suppliers in countries that have comparable food safety systems. So currently the three countries are Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The US FDA recognizes the food safety systems of these three countries as comparable or equivalent to that of the United States. And so you still must have an Fsvp program in place when you are importing foods from these countries. However, you do not have to do all of the same requirements as a full-blown Fsvp. So you must document that, first of all, the foreign supplier is actually in one of these three countries and not the distributor. You must also document that the food must be within the scope of the recognition for equivalency. So that means that it has to be, for the certain foods that are applicable, are finished products and not food ingredients, not a food that is intended for further processing or manufacturing. So if I am importing a food ingredient such as soy flour from Canada, that is not exempt. That does not fall under the modified Fsvp requirements because it will be for further manufacturing. If I am importing into the United States from Canada baked goods, cookies, then those are considered a finished product and would fall under the modified Fsvp requirement. And then the last element is that the supplier must be in good compliance standing with the regulatory agency, the federal regulatory agency that's equivalent, that's for that country. So again, for Canada, the supplier must be in good standing with CFIA, the equivalent of the US FDA. And Omar?
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, there is quite a bit of additional information. I'm going to mention a couple of things from FDA. If you go to the FDA website, that's probably the most comprehensive one. Next slide, please. There is, quite a bit of information, even a guidance that FDA put together. Please understand that it's difficult in just a short webinar to go into the details of all the specifics. It takes a little bit of time sometimes to understand if one product is covered or not. There's a lot of details. Also, several associations in representing different segments within the food industry have put together some information that can be very useful. We didn't cover, as Tim mentioned, the produce rule, but remember, if the product is within the produce rule, it may be part of the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. Next slide. Good. So I guess at this point, we can start opening to some questions. Would you like me to read some, Tim? How would you like to do this?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, so the first one, what is my obligation as a non-importer buyer as far as documentation goes from my broker or distributors in the US? Go ahead and take the first one.
Sure. So if you are working through a broker, so if you're located in the United States and you're purchasing ingredients or foods from a broker, and the broker is sourcing those from foreign suppliers, it is the broker's responsibility to ensure the Foreign Supplier Verification Program requirements are met. You may still have supplier requirements of your broker to say, for example, you may have a requirement of your broker that says, are you in compliance with the Fsvp regulation? And the broker will then say, yes, we are. So you may want to verify that your broker is in compliance with the regulation, but from a FDA perspective, it is the broker who is responsible for compliance and verifying that the foreign suppliers and the foods are being manufactured in a safe fashion.
Good. Remember, the idea is to find who is going to be the Fsbp importer, and as Tim mentioned, and this is something that we cover quite a bit during the training. It's based on who is the person, is a little bit of who wants to do it and who becomes the person in charge of doing that documentation. Another question, would olive juice be considered as juice product? I don't know. This is a very unique question that we need to probably review and make sure that if it falls into the HACCP, juice HACCP, that will have some exemptions. Remember, there are several ingredients that come that will not be considered juice, that will be part of Fsbp. Next question. Importing fresh fruits such as cantaloupes, melons, are not required Fsbp? Would you like to take that one, Tim?
Oh, sure. So there are certain elements of produce that are required under Fsvp. Again, as mentioned, if it's a human food that's not exempt, the regulation is 21 CFR 117, animal food 21 CFR 507, and then produce 21 CFR 112 to ensure that the foods are not adulterated. So there are occasions where fresh fruits, vegetables, fresh produce may fall under Fsvp.
Right. Right. So without going into the details, like what Tim was saying, these are raw agricultural commodities. Cantaloupes and melons are not exempt. Therefore, they are following under 21 CFR 112. They are raw agricultural commodities. Great. The next one. We import from New Zealand a green-leafed mussel dry extract. Is this not covered by the Fsvp? Well, it may be covered, but we don't know. Really, the extract may be used as a food component and therefore is an ingredient, will be covered, or maybe already a food. We need to do an evaluation, but chances are that yes, it will be covered. Next question. Can you explain with an example about non-alcoholic beverage that are exempt? I'm thinking, Tim, maybe just the ingredient. The fact that if all the ingredients come that they're going to be used in an alcoholic beverage, that's going to be an exemption.
Correct. I agree.
Yeah, that would be an example. Again, if the manufacturing facility has to, is in compliance with all the equivalent alcoholic manufacturing in here, they're going to be exempt. Another one. Could dietary supplements, raw material, bulk, and finished good be summarized regarding Fsvp? I don't think we can summarize that.
Yeah, again, that's so dietary supplement ingredients are considered food ingredients by FDA, and any that are being imported in from a foreign supplier would fall under the modified Fsvp requirements. A finished product, a finished dietary supplement falls under 21 CFR 111, a different regulation, and may be exempt from Fsvp requirements.
Good. Next one. Is the distributor, it's moving a little bit, is the distributor of the importer, if the distributor is the importer of record, what exempts, that exempts the US buyer from Fsvp? Again, if the distributor, I'm talking about once we are here in the state and I distributing the food, that's a different story. The idea is who is going to be in charge of the product, who is kind of in charge of the product when product goes through customs. That's how the Fsvp is seen. So if the buyer wants to import, the importer record doesn't mean you need to be the Fsvp importer. It can be a different person. The key is that it has to be a person here in the US trained to do that evaluation. All right, let's go to the next one. Can the distributor sign the Fsvp form for the manufacturer? Tim?
I assume that's the foreign manufacturer. So if the distributor is US based, the distributor becomes the Fsvp importer and is responsible for compliance under the regulations. If the distributor is foreign based, and the suppliers are the foreign suppliers are shipping their food to a foreign distributor, the Fsvp importer cannot be that foreign-based distributor. Again, the Fsvp importer must be a US entity. So Fsvp importer based in the United States must work with the foreign suppliers, not the foreign distributor. The foreign distributor could aid in gathering documentation, but the written assurance and all the other documentation as required by the regulation must come from the foreign suppliers.
Right. So basically, that's a case in which, again, the Fsvp importer must be somebody here in the States. Good. Next question. What are the verifications that need to be conducted by the US agent if the food comes from Canada? Well, Canada is now has an equivalency. So it depends on what product they're bringing, but and it depends. Again, we've seen cases where in custom they require some verification activities to be done. Again, it depends on what product is coming, and Canada is again one of these examples of country where there is almost a full equivalency now between the food safety regulation of Canada and the USA. Next question. If the distribution center outside the US receive the food product from 4 facilities and repack at the distribution center, can the distribution center be the Fsbp? I don't think so. Actually, no. That if they are doing repacking, right? They're becoming a facility that will have to provide information to the Fsbp importer.
Correct. So if the foreign distributor is repacking food that's received from foreign suppliers, and it is more than a de minimis nature, which means things are changed significantly. Now that foreign distributor becomes the foreign supplier, and then an Fsvp importer based in the United States would work directly with that one foreign distributor, which then now becomes a foreign supplier.
Good. Next one. The exemption to meet very small importer or small foreign supplier, could you use net profit or adjusted gross sales versus actual gross sales? I think this is based on the net sales, the sales in the last few years, right? The 3 years before the application.
Yes, it's net sales last 3 years average of not only the company, but its affiliates and the subsidiaries.
Right. Good. Next one. What about finished product marketing samples? There are 2 scenarios that they are presenting here. One is a nutrition fact panel and supplement fact panel for dietary. One is for food, the other for dietary. They provide that to their customers at their trade shows. I'm not sure what the question is, because are they talking about food? Marketing samples are usually for our customers to see how they can be, how they work, can be using ingredients and a finished product and for taste. So basically, I'm not sure if I am understanding this. The Foreign Supplier Verification Program doesn't review just label. If I'm not referring to labels, I don't know why I'm putting the fact panel here. Of course, the label has to be in compliance with USA. Somebody has to check for that. But it's different when it comes to compliance for food safety regulations. Now, when it comes to trade show, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that trade show is serving food and it may be covered by it. It's not like research food where it's not presented to the public.
Yes, so if the samples were being received for R&D purposes, they would be exempt, but if they're being used and offered for public consumption, then it's likely that they would fall under the Fsvp requirements.
Good. Next one, Tim, for you. Fsbp needs to be updated every 3 or 2 years?
For the modified, the small importers, where you fall under the modified requirements, you must receive written attestations from your foreign suppliers every 2 years. So for everybody else, you have a foreign supplier verification program or protocol, and you would conduct a hazard analysis as part of the FSVP. And based on that hazard analysis, based on the risk, you will make a determination of how often you need to verify the ingredients and the supplier. And so you may say that, based on the risk, you're going to verify everything annually. Other lower risks may be less frequent. The program itself needs to be reviewed at least every 3 years.
Great. The next one is a little bit long, and I'm going to try to see if I can summarize it better. And maybe for this, I will need my glasses. For a distribution center outside the US that receive the food or product in bulk, stores the product in bulk and then export that to the US. Would that distributing center needs its own Fsbp in addition to the actual foreign facilities? Well, basically no, because if there is no, as what Tim just said, if there is the minimums, if there is no further processing, just is holding a product with primary container that is never violated, sometimes primary and secondary container, that in that case they become warehouses, and we know there is no risk there. So in that case, they don't need to. If they decide to repack and open and break primary container, that would be a different idea, a scenario, and they will have to, have their own hazard analysis to evaluate that, and that would go into the foreign supplier Fsvp import. Anything else that you would like to add, Tim?
Nope, that covers it.
Great. Next one. If my company is a US entity, but a lot of products are produced by our foreign plants, do the products being produced by our international facility fall under Fsvp?
Yes. So if you are a domestic food manufacturer and receiving food or food ingredients from one of yours or several of your affiliate sister factories outside the United States, foreign suppliers, you are the Fsvp importer, and you must go through the Fsvp requirements for your sister plants as if they were any other foreign supplier.
Good. The next one, good blending dry foreign ingredients by foreign materials, by foreign material control, be considered further processing and manufacturing and therefore exempt from Fsvp. I am assuming that the question is, if we receive foreign ingredients and we process them into food, are we exempt from Fsvp? Yeah, you're not bringing food, you're bringing just ingredients. You still can handle that with your foreign supply exchange program, because if you have to comply with subpart G of 21 CFR 1117, you are covering part of that. I don't know if you would like to add anything else, Tim, to that.
No, that's fine.
It seems that they're covering this, is covered under subpart G on 21 CFR 117. Great. Next question. If a company is only importing concentrated fish oil, which is manufactured in a foreign facility in a US registered facility, but it's a foreign facility, does that mean the importer is exempt from 21 CFR part 123? I don't know which is a part 123.
I think the question is, if a company US based is importing concentrated fish oil, does that fall under 120 CFR 123 for fish regulations, or does it fall under Fsvp?
Yeah, I am not sure about what it is. Again, this is sometimes you got to understand that they are importing ingredients, they are covering it within their own regulation here as a food facility, right?
I would think that in this situation, the manufacturing of the fish oil by the foreign facility would fall under 21 CFR 123. However, it depends on how that fish oil is being used in the United States as a food ingredient.
Right.
It could fall under 117, and then Fsvp would be applicable.
Yeah. As you can see, some of the questions are very granular and hard to just respond without getting the context. Great. Next question. Does USDA have an equivalent to the FDA Fsbp? There are equivalents in a way in which the USDA have programs to go out and evaluate the foreign establishment. They call it establishment, not facility sometimes. Those establishments that will be exporting to here. So there is quite a bit of evaluations done, because remember, USDA has a system of inspection that is different from FDA. They use the inspectors in the plant while the plants are doing manufacturing. So they go to countries establish, some trade agreements and some contract with the USDA, and then these facilities are pretty well, inspected before they can be allowed to export to the USDA. I mean, to the USA. Good. Should we request FSBP documents completed by the broker for record purposes? Tim, yes, you were mentioning the broker is mainly the one, although I think we have seen some examples in which there are very small brokers that say, I would like for somebody else to take on that, right?
Yeah, that's possible. If you are working through a broker and that broker is US based, and that broker then is the FSVP importer, and you're receiving food or food ingredients from that broker, you may in your supply chain requirements say that you require some documentation from that broker saying that describes the process of what they do to comply with FSVP. Whether you're not required to, so you can certainly ask the broker to provide documentation that they have completed the FSVP requirements for the food that you are receiving from that broker. And that could be a part of your supply chain program.
Great. Next question. Who is a qualified individual or PCQI? PCQI stands for Preventive Control Qualified Individual. Basically, it's somebody trained to understand how to establish and implement a food safety plans in compliance with the FSMA regulation for preventive control for human food. Okay. Next one for you, Tim. What about meat products for animals to consume?
I'm sorry, what about?
What about that? It's not covered, right?
Yeah. So meat products for animals?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, animal food, pet treats would fall under FSVP under 21 CFR 507. If it's, again, it really depends on the type of food that it is. The source of that meat, the source facility of that meat will likely need to have a USDA
Right.
APHIS health permit, but the food itself, the pet food, the pet treats, would fall under 21 CFR 507, and then yes, it would have Fsvp requirements as well.
Good.
So maybe one more.
Yep. Whenever you want to stop, we can do one more. How can you verify that the broker is in compliance? Well, it's not, you know, I mean, your duty to verify the broker. You just ask the broker and ensure that the broker is taking into doing the paperwork for Fsbp as an Fsbp importer.
You could ask the broker for an attestation that yes, they do comply with Fsvp, and
Good.
or ask for other documentation, again, as part of your supply chain program.
Great. Good. All right.
Tim, would you advance the slide one more time just to give everybody your contact information?
Yeah.
And you guys are welcome to hang on and answer any more questions if you'd like, but from here on out, we will be taking everybody's questions and replying via email. So no worries, we will be able to get to you if we weren't able to get to you today. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us, and please feel free to contact either Omar or Tim, or you can reach us at trainings@easconsultinggroup.com. Thank you all very much for your time, and we look for, the presentation will also be made available and sent to all registrants via email. So be on the lookout for a handout of the slides as well as a recording of the presentation from today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.